Hi, Lenny.
Hi, Nancy.
Welcome to episode 34 of the Front Porch Book Club.
The Front Porch Book Club is a podcast that meets twice a month.
We like to dig deep into the relationship between characters and the worlds they live in.
Grab your book and iced tea and join us on the front porch.
Today, we're continuing our discussion about Van Jones's book, Beyond the MessyTruth. We enjoyed talking about this book so much, we decided that we needed to keep going and do another episode where we can just talk about what he has to say.
Okay, so for those who aren't familiar with Van Jones, among many of his accomplishments is a 3-time New York Times bestseller author, and he also hosts 2 shows on CNN, The Van Jones Show and The Redemption Project. So this book that we're continuing to talk about today is Beyond the MessyTruth. To kind of summarize it, he proposes 4 areas for people from all political beliefs to kind of come together in these areas to see if we can bridge the gap and do some problem solving and come together and work on them. So those 4 areas are the criminal justice system, addiction, 21st century jobs in high-tech industries, and clean technology. What was your favorite part of the book?
I do love policy.
Yes, you do.
So I really enjoyed diving into those 4 policy areas that he laid out, and then his prescription for how to address each of those 4 areas. I thought that what he wrote was very persuasive. I thought it was a really interesting and meaty part of the book. I loved how he described the problem and then gave solutions and explained why they would be solutions that would be appealing to conservatives and progressives. I did look at the copyright of the book, and I think in the 5 years since the book was published, we have not really seen very impressive bipartisan movements in any of these 4 areas. That's disappointing. All 4 areas are really worth some work. People across the political spectrum could really find some agreement in these areas. Like, for instance, criminal justice reform. Who doesn't want our country to be safer by ensuring that, that we have the police force that has the time and energy to apprehend those that need to be, that those who need to be in jail are, and that those who are doing time and eventually will be released will have a good shot at rehabilitation and life after prison to reduce recidivism. So in criminal justice reform, he had 10 policy prescriptions. I think they're all very interesting. So I thought I would just list all 10. What do you think?
Okay, Nance, go for it.
Because I love policy so much. Okay, the first is dismantle the school to prison pipeline. Excellent. Second is eliminate the overuse of fees and fines in our criminal justice system. Third, abolish money bail. We talked a little bit about that in the last episode. Fourth, decriminalize addiction and mental illness. We do know that the prison system in the United States is the largest facility of people with addiction and mental illness in our country. 5, declassify low-level offenses and keep people out of prison who don't need to be. 6, get rid of mandatory minimum sentencing. Great experiment. Pretty clear that it's failed. 7, abolish solitary confinement. 8, increase access to prison education and visitation. 9, ease collateral consequences and reentry. And 10, restore voting rights. So I think he did a great job laying out each of these solutions, backing them up with data and stories. These solutions were really my favorite part. How about you, Lenny? Did you have a favorite part of the book?
I don't know that I had a favorite. I would say that I enjoyed jumping into his internal workings.
Yeah.
And seeing him explore the other side. And then not only did he explore it and try to understand it and to respect it as different, but that there were some good thoughts on the other side and good people on the other side. So then how can our country make this journey? How can we work together on these big issues? How can we use what we know to solve these big, big problems? So I just kind of enjoyed the holistic part of his personal journey and his call for all of us to do the same thing and not to be so much in your own camp or your own silo, but to reach out and learn and understand and try to find areas where we can agree. Because we all do want to live in a clean environment and a safe environment. How to do that is sometimes where we fall apart.
Mm-hmm.
That's kind of what I enjoyed about it. I'm concerned about the prison system and the criminal justice system. I am concerned about addiction.
Yeah.
The environment's important to me.
He describes some of the experiences that led him specifically to his interest in working in communities. And one story we didn't talk about last time was an experience he called the defining event of his young adulthood. And this was in April 1992, when what we thought of was an all-white jury acquitted 5 Los Angeles Police Department officers in the beating of Rodney King, a Black unarmed motorist. And this led to massive riots in Los Angeles, now called the LA Uprisings. Do you remember that in 1992, Lenny?
I do remember that. And him saying, can't we all just get along? That was kind of his phrase, but tragic.
Yeah. And for Van Jones, he said that the officers being acquitted felt to him as a Black man that this meant that in the United States, it was open season on Black men. He shortly thereafter, as a law student, was acting as a legal monitor at a Justice for Rodney King rally in San Francisco. And he was following the officers' orders about where the crowds could be and what they should be doing and where they should be going, but he was arrested anyway. And for him, this really reinforced the feeling that as a Black man, he was living in a world where he would not be treated fairly. And this really started his activism in the criminal justice system. I thought that was really a compelling story. One of my favorite parts of the book also were the 2 chapters that he addresses as open letters to liberals and conservatives. What's good about it is that he reinforces what is really positive about these 2 political perspectives. We're not talking about for racist perspectives. We're just talking about people who politically are conservative versus more liberal. So no one who reads this book is going to feel attacked. He really tries to show the strengths of more liberal and more conservative points of view. Can I go through his open letters?
Are these policies?
No, these are not so much policies as they're lenses for thinking
lenses
about policy.
Well, you're good with lenses too. Let's look at lenses.
Okay.
Yeah.
For liberals, he says, progressives do pretty well at embracing the historically marginalized, but don't do so well embracing the newly marginalized or the about to be marginalized. I thought this was such a strong point of his. I absolutely love this point. And he uses an example of a fictional character of a newly marginalized man from Indiana who's been laid off from his manufacturing job. His son is hooked on painkillers. His community is dying. He's losing his social connections. And his daughter, who's a college student, the one person who has a chance of escaping poverty and the community decline, every time she comes home from college, she keeps criticizing him for his white privilege. And he keeps saying, I don't have any privilege. I don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah, that's a great story.
Yeah.
That I think a lot of people can relate to, because the white privilege is something a lot of people talk about. And I think that that's interesting. Yeah.
Yeah, I thought that was so good. So this idea of progressives thinking beyond historically marginalized to newly marginalized and about to be marginalized, really strong. Secondly, he said, if progressives are truly the party of inclusivity, they need to start by respecting and making room for faith in their ranks. And I thought that also was so strong, because I think in general, for some liberals, people of faith, they really do not welcome
That was a blind side for me. I never felt that way, and I didn't know other people felt that way.
Third, he says that we need to recognize everyone suffers from biases and willful blind spots. Again, love this one so much. I definitely have heard, perhaps I've even said, science is real and we need to stick to facts. But the reality is, we all do suffer from biases and blind spots, and we all can use information in ways that support what we believe in. So I thought that was very strong.
Well, that's true.
Along with that, everyone can be data dumb.
Well, yes, I think we can agree with that.
Yep. And then finally, he said progressives need to work in and with communities of color and not just give lip service to communities of color. And here, of course, he speaks from a lot of authority.
That was a lens I did know.
Okay.
I recognize this like a bunch of white people telling African American or Latino people, oh, we're on your side. We believe in these things. And the people going, you have no clue. You don't know what's going on here. Why don't you really come and work in our community and find out what's really going on? Thanks for your help, though. And thanks for your support. Can I hit some of the conservatives?
Yes, go ahead.
The conservative part is embrace your strong tradition of limited balance of powers. So embrace your tradition. Conservatives should be on the front lines fighting tyranny. What do you think of that, Nance?
I really liked that. And this idea of the conservative tradition of saying smaller government, less regulation, and then saying, okay, and what that means is that we do want less government. And when there are dangers of tyranny or authoritarianism for conservatives, they need to be the ones who are most sensitive to that and be the ones who are calling it out.
Number 2, don't allow faith to be used to exclude or dominate. Okay, because we're both smirking a little bit because we can see each other, but we know that Christianity is the number one religion in the United States, the most well-known, the most followed. Again, it might be their blind spot. Number 3, respect all Americans. Be the party that can win the hearts and minds of America, not just elections. An interesting statement. And the last one, don't just be anti-liberal, fix problems. And I honestly, for both sides, I think that's true.
Yeah.
I think there is this fight that goes back and forth.
At many levels of government, there's this idea, if I'm a conservative and it looks like a liberal is getting a win, then I am against it, even if it makes sense.
Right. Oh, yeah.
And vice versa. For a liberal, if they see a conservative as somehow looking like they're getting a win, then they have to be against it. And it's not about fixing problems. It's more about being perceived as the dominant power.
Yeah, I agree. I've often thought if the coronavirus would have started in a different party, this whole thing could have been done differently. The Democrats would be, give us our jobs. We're living paycheck to paycheck. We can't survive. And the Republicans go, no. It just is like whatever issue comes, the sides get as far apart as possible and bicker for absolutely no reason at all.
Yeah. And then basically just try to inflame their bases by saying outrageous things and twisting things that others have said so that it just even further divides us.
Right. And what Van is doing is she's trying to bring us together. So when you're talking at Thanksgiving and somebody says something that might be a little political, this is sort of a roadmap for talking to others who have different political views than you do. One quote that I really like from his book, which is on page 109 in your book, but maybe not my Kindle.
The Kindle reappears.
The Kindle. I get no royalties from Kindle. This is what he says. If we work to address people's legitimate economic concerns, it follows that they will be less vulnerable to the politics of fear and anger. And Nancy, how much do we see fear and anger is what riles people up.
Yeah.
Someone has learned that if we put fear into people, then they're going to vote your way.
Yeah.
So the use of fear in politics is a big strategy.
I absolutely agree. In fact, there are studies that when you trigger fear in people, they can become very open to suggestions that otherwise they would not be. Fear, unfortunately, works magic. Fear of the other, fear for future, fear of so many things. If people are feeling that they have a more stable environment, and this is, I like that quote too from Van, if they're feeling more stable personally, then the idea that they would be less vulnerable to fear and anger, I think is really good. So I like this idea of working together to address economic concerns.
Right, because it's people's money.
Yeah.
Money is a number one concern for most people. But I also see too that the way this country is going, that is another big area of fear. It's not just the money. That is kind of a fear-based anger kind of thing too that comes up.
I think that's really true. I think just the fear of change is part of it also. Things are changing too fast. We don't know where they're leading, that we're leaving things behind that were valuable. But I think what is helpful is to think through that. Well, what is valuable that we're leaving behind, but what is valuable that we're gaining? And I'd like to hear more discussions about that rather than just this fear and anger.
Yeah, I like what when he talked about going to the coal mining area.
Yes.
And of course, like the fear of these miners who this is their job, probably not too many jobs in that area. And this is how I provide for my family. There's no other job I can have. This is it.
Yeah.
So there's a fear there, right? If you go for clean energy, well, how am I going to feed my children? So that fear kind of weaves itself in a lot of different areas.
I think so too. That was a way of life for people in that community. It's not only the miners themselves, but the miners' parents and grandparents, grandfathers probably mostly, were also miners. It was their entire way of life. And so it's not just where am I going to get a job, but my way of life is threatened. And I don't know what a different way of life looks like for me.
Right.
Okay, so Lenny, should we sprint through the other policy prescriptions? Because I thought they were so interesting. And because, as I said, I do love policy.
For you, Nancy, we will talk about policy because actually his book does talk about policy. So absolutely.
This book was your suggestion, but it really hits so many of my interests in policy. It's kind of hilarious.
I liked it because it was Van, and you liked it because he has a lot of ideas and the policies and directions. And that's all your real strong point. Yeah. So should we talk addiction?
Yes, definitely.
All right. So Van says some policies to consider with addiction. And I think everyone can agree we have an addiction crisis in the United States.
Yeah.
That is not partisan.
Yeah.
We got an issue. So the first one is to end the detox and die model. We do have a lot of rehab. We do have a lot of detox. We know how to do rehab. But what happens is that after people leave rehab, they go back and unfortunately they relapse. And if they use to the level that they used before they went to rehab, they can die because their bodies aren't used to that level of drug.
Yeah.
2, make life-saving drugs available. And I was surprised by this one, Nancy, because I really felt like as a society, we did so much with Narcan. Like, I think I had a training once on how to do Narcan.
Yeah.
I was surprised that one came up. 3, treat people in the criminal justice system. So in other words, treat the people that are addicted instead of like throwing them in jail. Encourage insurer support. In other words, we've got to make sure that if people need rehab, that they can afford to go to rehab and somebody's going to pay for it.
Right. Because it can be expensive.
Very expensive because inpatient is inpatient. And
Yeah.
if that's what you need, a 24/7, I need to be separated from people, places, and things, and I need to go off and I can't be around anybody right now. Then if that's what you need, that's what you need. If you need
Right.
outpatient or just a day treatment program, that's fine too. But people need to have access so that they can truly get the help that they need and they don't have to be a millionaire to get it.
Yeah.
Number 5, train medical professionals and practitioners, first responders, community service providers to deal with the crisis. Obviously, everyone needs more training in that.
Yeah.
And decriminalize addiction is his thought, period.
Yeah.
This needs to be out of the criminal justice system. This needs to be headed into a completely different area. What are your thoughts on these areas? Do any of them strike you as different or a surprise or any of those things?
I don't know as much about addiction as you do, but I know enough about this area that all 6 of these solutions made a lot of sense to me. And again, he does a great job explaining them. Certainly, criminal justice and addiction in our country is intertwined in ways that really leave the offender and the person who's addicted usually worse off rather than on the road to rehabilitation. All of these solutions made a lot of sense. And again, they're really solutions that will lead to hopefully less addiction, greater recovery, less criminal activity. These are things that we can all support. The end goals are things that would be great for our country.
Yeah, and you know what? The fear
Yeah,
comes up again because when you talk to some Americans, they're like, no, no, they deserve to be in jail. They can't be out here. They're going to give my kids drugs, or, there's a fear that's in this area too. And I do understand and I do appreciate that. So people like the fact that there's a criminal justice response to
sure,
this area, of
sure,
course.
sure.
So people understand that and get that. But well, although jail removes you, it doesn't teach you anything about returning to where you got the drugs, to understanding why you use, to healing your last hurts and your pains. And actually, mental health is a huge part of this too, because a lot of people use drugs because of mental health issues.
Right.
Treating the people in the criminal justice system is important. Now, in New York, we did have drug court,
Mm-hmm.
and it was a judge and people that dealt a lot with addiction issues,
Right.
and they were kind of handled separately.
Mm-hmm.
People were looking at, look, they broke the law, but we're going to manage this person differently. I haven't heard a lot about that lately. I don't know if you have or not.
Yeah, those problem solving courts are really effective. They have lower recidivism, they have more success in general. I mean, just everything about problem solving courts is very positive. The only negative is that they can be a little more expensive to operate. But overall, when you look at the cost to society, the cost to keep people in prison, the return on investment is actually excellent. But unfortunately, the way that most public systems are funded, they're funded by function rather than comprehensively. So I think some problem solving courts have trouble maintaining funding despite really good outcomes.
Yep, well said.
Yeah, there's also things like veterans courts and other courts like that that are looking at what are the specific needs of certain populations. Do we need to address other factors of what will likely be contributing to someone's involvement in the criminal justice system in order to be able to return them to society?
Yeah.
Really, really positive. So, for the last 2 areas, 21st century jobs in high tech and clean tech, he actually didn't have point by point solutions like he did for criminal justice and addiction.
Just the passion.
Exactly. And lots of examples of programs that seem to be working. So that was interesting, but a little less kind of point by point. He just talks about the importance of these jobs and that we are on the cusp of really exciting technology in these areas, and we need more people going into these fields. maybe to wrap up some of what he talked about, I want to talk about one other story that he tells in this book. By now, he is a well-known CNN commentator. He is covering the murders of 9 Black parishioners, and I guess also the pastor of Emmanuel AME Church in Charleston, South Carolina, by a white supremacist. He is there with Jake Tapper. I love Jake Tapper, covering the story. They're right outside the church. And in the church, there's music and singing. This is just a day or two after the shooting. Jake asks Van, he says, how can this be? They sound happy. And Van said Jake's question immediately helped him get past all the anger that he was feeling at these murders. And he explains to Jake, that's not happiness. And he kind of proudly says there's a distinction in the Black church between happiness and joy. Happiness is dependent on external circumstance, but joy comes from within. So despite the circumstance, we say, hallelujah anyhow. It's our way of saying, you're not going to take away my dignity or my inner knowledge that I have worth, if only in the eyes of my Creator. You're not going to take my humanity. You're not going to turn me into something other than a beautiful child of God. I thought that was a beautiful story, this idea of hallelujah anyhow in the Black church. And I think that sometimes this political acrimony has led me to maybe demonizing others and not seeing them as beautiful children of God. And I don't act like a beautiful child of God either. And I'm denying other people's humanity and staining my own when I do that. So I thought that that was, in the midst of the horror and the evil of those church people being murdered, that idea of hallelujah anyhow was really beautiful.
It was really beautiful. Even hearing the words now, Nance, just brings tears to my eyes.
Yeah.
Okay. So, yeah, it does, because I understand that faith and that journey, but there's so much pain in that.
Yes.
For that to become a part of your culture,
Oh.
that you understand that pain and then not be surprised or shocked, but to have, oh, well, this is how we do it. Like this is our reaction to it because we have been through it so many times. So we understand what it's like to be beaten down, and we understand what it's like to be oppressed. And we understand that horrible things happen to us. And this is how we respond. Like that just takes, I don't know.
Yeah. And to have a whole culture that understands that. This isn't just like an individual's coping mechanism. No, this is what we as the Black church do, because we have been here so many times.
And then the white people go, oh, we didn't know. Like, we're blind to that. We're just so blind because of our privilege and how we grew up.
Yeah. Instead
of ending this podcast with tears streaming down my face, it's supposed to be Van is talking to us about joy, internal joy, and that obviously comes within, and that's beautiful that a church should have internal joy and be able to pull that out of themselves and be able to express it at a time of tragedy. And I'm sure you remember when that happened, and I remember when that happened. For somebody who goes to church, I do think about that. But I also know that I don't think about it as much as other people think about it.
Right. And then you think more recently of the murders in a synagogue.
Right. In Pittsburgh.
Yeah. Well, and in Texas. This was a great episode. I'm glad we had a chance to talk a little bit more about Van's book, because it's just full of stories about his journey and also these very practical solutions. And that's what I found as a really interesting combination of personal and practical.
This is a book I'm going to come back to. And I did learn from him, not only all of the policies and things like that, but to reach across the aisle more and find ways to connect in those common areas was really good. Next month, Hidden Valley Road, Nance.
Oh my goodness, Linda.
Written by Robert Kolker. I'm a little bit more than halfway. This is an interesting book. Get this book now.
Yes.
So that you're ready for us. That's what we're going to be hitting in August.
This book is fabulous. I literally started reading it yesterday and could not put it down, and I'm almost finished with it.
Well, yeah.
That's true. I'm a fast reader. I know what you were going to say.
You are a fast reader.
But still, this is a true life story of a family living in Colorado Springs.
Yes.
Had 12 children, and 6 of the boys were diagnosed with schizophrenia.
So I'm still trying to figure out who's going to develop it.
Okay. But it's not just the story of this family and their experience, as if that would not be interesting enough, but also how this family and their involvement with researchers has helped us as a society understand more about this disease and begin to address it with better therapies. That was really interesting as well.
I appreciated the historical information and the journey of therapy and psychiatry from where we started and how that has grown and shaped along with science to understand what was going on in the human brain. Love it so far. So that's what we're doing next month.
And next month, the author, New York Times bestselling author Robert Kolker, will be joining us as well for our second episode. And we're really looking forward to talking with him.
Absolutely. It's a fascinating book. Our episodes come out twice a month, the first and third Wednesday of each month.
And our website is frontporchbookclub.com. Lenny, see you next time.
Okay, bye-bye.
Bye-bye.